I want to welcome you to the first of a series in the series of talks on the book called Apes or Angels, which is available from Amazon.com and also from apesorangels.com. You can go to either site. This book is highly controversial because it deals with one of what we call Darwin's two dangerous ideas. This was my own notion. In reading Darwin fairly extensively, I realized that he had not one dangerous idea, according to Daniel Dennett, the philosopher from Tufts University, who wrote a book talking about the idea of evolution by natural selection, which we now accept as a general theory of the descent of all life on Earth. He calls it a dangerous idea because it essentially locks out any kind of theological or metaphysical explanation of events on Earth with regard to the biological sciences. This seems to be the case. We can't imagine any way to entertain intervening ideas such as vitalism or finalism that make any sense in explaining the events of nature. And that includes the origin of humans and the nature of humans. These events seem to take place naturally according to the essential law or theory by Darwin, and makes it completely unnecessary to add explanations that are of a religious or metaphysical orientation. So Dennett's thesis is that Darwin essentially made life almost impossible for religionists by coming up with this general theory explaining the evolution of life on Earth. That would make Darwin an enemy in a theoretical sense, but Darwin was an enemy anyway because people saw this entire theoretical perspective as anti-religious, as anti-Christian, as anti-Bible, and indeed it seemed to be that way. So for the last 150 years, Darwin has been public enemy number one for people called creationists or the new ID movement. These people want their Bible no matter what, and they generally they are not professional biologists in the sense that they are published in peer-reviewed journals in a competitive way, and they are trying to save their Christianity from a general demise which occurred in Europe. Europe historically simply gave up Christianity for the most part, and only a handful of people in Europe still practice Christianity. You can say this is a bad thing, and others will say it's a good thing. But it is a fact that about 80% of Europeans believe in evolution, do not accept the Bible literally, and very few of them even read the Bible these days because they are essentially secular humanists. So Darwin's first dangerous idea, and his theory of evolution, alienated religionists across the board in the Western world. And I sort of came up with the second dangerous idea myself by reading Darwin's second book, the 1871 book called The Descent of Man, in which he very clearly discusses racial differences among Homo sapiens subspecies, of which he thought there were about 5. That can be argued over what it is, 4 or 5 or some other number. The human biodiversity is enormous, but in any case, I call this a dangerous idea for obvious reasons. If the human races are unequal biologically, then to make a case that they are equal in a broad universal sense is defective. It is certainly a valid point to argue that humans must be morally equal, and that's perfectly valid and can be is a highly defensible position. And our Constitution, our human rights, and so on are based on sort of a Jeffersonian idea that humanity is equal in a moral sense, and surely that implies in a legal sense as well. Before the courts, all men are created equal. However, the Darwinian perspective intercedes at this point and reminds us that while we are morally and legally equal, we are biologically unequal. And this has strong implications for a pluralistic society where we try to go to school together and live in neighborhoods together and get involved in all sorts of events, including politics together. And if we have underlying genetic and biological differences, which involve genetics, biochemistry, physiology, and so on, this will have implications which can be extremely serious for any pluralistic society. In a homogeneous society, like Finland, which is largely racially homogeneous, there are far fewer difficulties. And going back over recent history, this idea of liberal egalitarianism, which has arisen gradually over the last 100 years, can be seen as being implemented more strongly after the 1930s by way of the professional anthropology. Anthropology from Franz Boas of Columbia University on advocated a view of humankind as essentially egalitarian in the liberal political sense. This meant that they had to make their physical anthropology obey this mandate. This was extremely difficult. It meant that, for one implication is that they believed in the blank slate, that if we are all essentially empty vessels and can benefit from environmental experiences to various extents, and can reach all kinds of great potential, we as individuals, this view had enormous implications for education, for instance. That you could blame the environment, you could blame teachers, you could blame parents if children failed, but you can never blame their genes, their biology. And this has gotten us into enormous trouble. The civil rights movement reminded us of this with Brown versus Board of Education. Bringing children together into the same schools would hypothetically equalize us, and so we have attempted these experiments against Darwin's observation that we are fundamentally, biologically unequal. Thank you very much.